The apology comes in at 11:47 at night, 3 lines long, and by the second line, you already know exactly how the third one ends. I'm sorry, I really am. I know I hurt you, I just get so overwhelmed sometimes, and I say things I don't mean. Every word in that message is technically an apology, and your chest still doesn't unclench. Something in you is waiting for a part that never arrives. You read it twice, not because it's confusing, but because it's familiar in a way that feels almost mechanical. Like you've seen this exact shape before, maybe even these exact words, 3 months ago, after a different argument about a different thing. Same rhythm, same order. Then a reason, then a version of the story, where the reason is the real point, and the sorry was just the doorway to get there. Here's the part almost nobody names out loud. By the time you finish reading it, you're not thinking about what happened anymore. You're thinking about how tired he sounded in the last line. You're already typing something to make him feel less bad. Somehow, within 90 seconds of being hurt, you've become the one doing the comforting. That flip is the actual subject here. Not whether the apology was real, the flip. People spend a lot of energy trying to detect sincerity in apologies. Reading tone, counting exclamation points, deciding if "I'm sorry" sounded shaky enough to count. But sincerity was never the part worth measuring, because sincerity is a feeling, and feelings are invisible. What's visible is what an apology does once it lands. And a specific kind of apology, the kind people eventually start describing as narcissistic, once they've lived through enough of them, has a very consistent job. Its job isn't to repair what broke. Its job is to end the moment where someone is upset with him. Those are not the same task, even though they can look identical for the first 10 seconds. Watch what a repair apology does. It slows down. It asks a follow-up question. It can sit in the discomfort of being wrong without immediately needing to leave that discomfort. It doesn't require the other person to manage it afterward. Now watch the other kind. It moves fast, often before you've even finished explaining what hurt. It arrives preloaded with context nobody asked for yet. And it tends to end on his feelings, not yours. How overwhelmed he was, how hard the week has been, how he hates that this keeps happening to him. You came in to talk about a wound. You leave the conversation reassuring the person who made it. This is the part people misunderstand most. They assume a manipulative apology sounds cold, or fake, or obviously self-serving. In practice, the most convincing ones are the opposite. They're specific. I know I brushed you off when you were trying to tell me about your day. That wasn't fair. That level of detail feels like accountability, because we've learned to associate specificity with sincerity. But specificity without any change afterward is just a well-built key that doesn't open anything. It's proof he was paying attention, not proof anything is going to be different on Tuesday. There's a version of this that's even quieter, and it doesn't sound like an apology at all. I'm sorry you feel that way. Notice what that sentence does. It removes him from the sentence entirely. It's not "I did something," it's "you're having a reaction." The apology has been rerouted to your feelings, as if your feelings are the event that needs addressing, not his behavior. People often walk away from that sentence more confused than before it was said, and they can't quite explain why. It sounded like an apology, technically had the word "sorry" in it, and somehow left them holding the whole weight of the conversation by themselves. Or the conditional version. I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me? Which turns the apology into a transaction that's already been completed and paid for, as if saying the word discharges the debt, regardless of whether anything about the underlying behavior gets addressed. If you're still upset after that, You're now the unreasonable one for wanting more than the receipt. There's also the version that shows up in front of other people, which works a little differently. He brings it up unprompted at dinner with your friends. I really put my foot in it last week, didn't I? Laughing lightly, already forgiven by the room, before you've said a word. It sounds like humility. What it actually does is finish the story publicly, on his own terms, before you get a private say in how it gets told. If you bring it up again later, alone, it can start to feel like you're reopening something that was already handled in front of witnesses who watched him handle it. From the inside, this often isn't experienced as strategy. A lot of people who do this genuinely feel a wave of panic or shame in the moment. The relationship feels at risk, and the fast apology is a fast exit from that fear for them. The apology's real audience, underneath, is often the apologizer's own discomfort, not the other person's pain. That doesn't make the impact on you any less real. It just means the apology was solving a problem, just not the one you brought into the room. Here's the quiet cost, and it builds slower than people expect. The first time this happens, you probably don't notice the pattern at all. You just accept the apology and move on, because that's what a reasonable person does. The fifth time, something starts shifting. You start pre-writing your case before conversations even happen. You start screenshotting things, not out of drama, but because you've stopped fully trusting your own memory of what was said. Because every time you've brought something up, the story somehow ended up being partly your fault, or overblown, or not that deep. So you start collecting proof for events you actually witnessed. That's a strange thing to have to do in a relationship with someone you love. It's also one of the clearest signs that the apologies you've been getting were never designed to close the gap between you. They were designed to close the conversation. There's a second cost that's easy to miss, because it doesn't feel like a cost at first. You start grading harm on a curve. Instead of asking, was this okay? You start asking, was this as bad as the worst time? And if it wasn't, it gets filed under fine. Your baseline for what's acceptable quietly drops, one apology at a time, and nobody ever announced that it was dropping. If any of this is happening in a relationship, where you also feel unsafe, or where you're regularly doubting things you clearly remember, that's worth bringing to a therapist or counselor who works with relationships specifically. Not because there's something wrong with you for not sorting it out alone, but because outside perspective is genuinely useful here. More useful than another night of trying to replay the conversation until it makes sense. This isn't a diagnosis of any particular person, by the way. Most of us have done a version of the fast, self-focused apology at some point, usually when our own shame got too loud too quickly. The distinction that actually matters isn't whether someone has ever done this. It's whether it's the only apology they know how to give, over and over, with nothing on the other side of it changing. There's a myth attached to this that makes it harder to see clearly. The idea that the more visibly upset someone looks while apologizing, the more real it must be. Tears, a shaking voice. I hate myself for this. It reads as depth of feeling, and it can genuinely be that. But intensity and accountability aren't the same measurement. A person can be devastated in the moment, mean every word of it, and still have changed nothing about the actual behavior by the following weekend. The size of the emotion tells you how bad he feels. It doesn't tell you what he's going to do differently. Those got taught to us as the same thing, and they were never the same thing. If you want one small, useful habit out of all this, it isn't a script to recite back or a boundary to announce. It's smaller than that. It's noticing what you feel in the 10 seconds right after an apology lands, before you do anything with it, before you start managing his mood, before you say it's okay to speed things along. Just naming to yourself quietly, whether the ache is still there or whether it actually eased. That 10-second check is the only honest data you have, and it's the one thing nobody can talk you out of. Which is really the whole test, if you're looking for one. Not the wording, not how sorry it sounded. What happens in the 2 weeks after? Does the behavior repeat with a slightly better vocabulary next time? Or does something small and real actually move? So go back to that message at 11:47. You don't need to reread it a third time, looking for proof of what he meant. The message was never going to tell you. The next 2 weeks were always going to tell you. That's where the apology either becomes true or just becomes the same sentence again, dressed a little differently, waiting for you to do the comforting one more time. This is meant for reflection, not as a professional evaluation of any relationship or person. If you recognize a lot of this and it's weighing on you, talking to a therapist or counselor is a good next step, not a last resort.